All right. We're going to start in three, two, one. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. No matter where you're watching us from around the globe, I say thank you for allowing us into your homes, but most importantly, into your hearts. If you're watching us on the DBNA television network, a sincere thank you and continue to support the sponsors, the network, the talents, and the great list of shows. If you're listening to us in podcast form today, Alan and I say turn that knob up and let us put that flavor in your ear. We're here to inspire and empower you with tools for your toolbox. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to lace them up once again for another edition of the Coach Scott Field Show. If you're asking us, why should I pay attention here this next 52 minutes? We have us a winner. I'm excited. I feel like a kid on Christmas Eve ready to wake up with Santa Claus because this guy is a winner. I have Alan Stein on with me today. He's the author of Raise Your Game, and I've got a copy of his book. And this guy is so cool, he took the time to sign it for me. So that's big time and a professional touch right there, Alan. Thank you. He's a corporate speaker. He's a corporate performance coach. Father to three lovely children, and I know that's all a part of the success. So without further ado, my man, Alan, welcome to the Coach Scott Field Show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's awesome to connect with you, and I look forward to a fun conversation.
Oh, it's going to be fun, but the most important thing is it's going to be empowering, it's going to be impactful, and I just know our viewers, and I implore our viewers to share this content because they're going to get tools for their toolbox, my man.
Absolutely. Sure hope so.
All right. Well, let's just dive right into it because, man, this hour is going to go fast. The book, Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best. Where did that inspiration come from, and what was the motivation to put the book out there?
Well, ever since I graduated from college in the mid 90s, instantly became a voracious reader and really dove headfirst into what we call the self-help and self-development space and would really devour books at a pretty rapid clip. So I've always had this very strong respect and appreciation for authors and for books. And I can think of a handful of books that really shifted my perspective and opened my eyes up and enlightened me to some new ways of thinking. I mean, I was a different person having read some of these works. And that seed was planted very early in me that if I ever felt that I had enough quality information and content to share with others, that I would write a book. And, you know, it took quite a journey to get to that point. But when I made the distinct leap from the basketball training space over to the corporate keynote speaking space, I figured that was the time to do it. And, you know, I also had realized and was incredibly grateful for all of the opportunities that the game of basketball afforded me, that I was able to work with and work alongside some of the biggest names as far as players and coaches in the game, and that I was privy to certain things that they showed me, and I wanted to be a steward and pay that forward to others. So that was kind of the impetus for writing the book. It was a bucket list item of something that I always wanted to do to make a contribution to those around me, while at the same time pay forward and be a steward of the lessons and practical, actionable strategies that I had learned. So that was the reason for writing the book. And I really enjoyed the process, and I'm very proud of the finished product.
Well, you know what? Steel sharpens steel. And I'm going to tell you what, people need to get this for their library. I mean, I don't care if you are a coach for your team, if you're an individual, if you own a business and you have a group of people that you're working with. Really good read. Where can they get that book, Alan?
It's actually sold anywhere where major book retailers are selling books. You know, Amazon's certainly an easy spot to get it, but Barnes and Noble and other places carry it. I also took the time to record the audiobook, so I did the read and the narration for it. So if folks want to get that, they can get that on iTunes or on audible.com. Really enjoyed it, and certainly have immense gratitude for anyone that invests their attention into either reading and or listening to the book.
Oh, I tell you what, I have spent time this last week reading it, and there are excerpts that I've taken out of it, and it resonates with me. And there's a connection and a connectivity, not because we come from the basketball space and we know certain people that we've been able to been blessed to have observed and learn and grow from and evolve. But this book will truly help anybody be a better version of themselves and help them evolve. So I commend you for that, and great job, great work.
Well, thank you so much. And, I worked hard to make sure that even if someone doesn't have the same love or affinity for basketball that you and I have, or even if they don't really like sports, that they'll still be able to have some takeaways from the book. That I wanted to make sure that the most important part are the lessons and the strategies and the things that any of us can apply to our life. And of course, there's plenty of sports stories and basketball stories because that's an important part of my journey. But I wanted to make sure that it could apply to anyone. And whether you're trying to improve, in your craft as a musician or as a teacher or as a doctor or a lawyer or a mechanic, whether you have a small team as in your nuclear family or you run a massive corporation, I wanted to make sure that the book had lessons that could apply across the board.
And there are applicable tools and strategies to help people get there. It's one thing to hear people talk and you can be inspired, but that inspiration will fade. But with you giving them the tools, I mean, there's a strategy, and you kind of give them how it can be mapped out and how they too can attain that success. And that's an extra step with the attention to detail that I really respect.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you actually brought that up because really I just consider the book a blueprint, if you will. The actual work and the heavy lifting still needs to be done by the person that's reading it. I kind of say as with a smile and a wink that reading the book will do nothing to improve your life. Reading the book and applying the strategies and lessons can be life-changing for you. So it's not that knowledge is power, and that's something we've all been told ever since we were youngins, but it's not the knowledge where we get the power, it's the application of the knowledge. So it's taking something that you read and then applying those principles strategically to your life or to your work. That's where you'll reap the benefit. So I always want to make sure that we connect those dots, because I know lots of people, they also devour books at a pretty fast clip, and they have a bookshelf full of the best self-help and self-development books, but all they do is read them. They don't actually implement what's being taught. So to me, what's most important is to take those things and put them into action. Changing our habits, changing our behavior, and putting things into action is where we actually start to make a positive change in our lives.
See, I like that because we've all run across people who are like ask holes. They will ask certain things and how can I do this and what do I do? And then when we tell them how it can be done and they don't do the work and follow up, I mean, there can't be entitlement. They can't expect it. They're going to have to work at it. But yet this book is that blueprint to help them crawl before they walk and walk before they run.
Absolutely. And also keep in mind that, the book is kind of equal parts creation of things that I'd like to share, but then it's also equal parts of curation, things that I've learned from so many other people, the books that I've read and the mentors I've had, and I've tried to package it all together. But this is simply my perspective and my approach. One of the things I think is incredibly important for anyone that reads any book is to have a level of discernment, and that you don't have to take everything at face value. I don't expect readers to believe and buy into every single thing that I share. But what I challenge them to do is actually process these lessons and strategies, run it through their own filter and say, I like this thing that Alan's sharing here. This is in alignment with my core beliefs. This is something I can use. And I also have absolutely no problem with them disagreeing, having a different perspective, or challenging something that I put in the book. I tend to believe that self-awareness is really the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. But I'm okay if someone challenges that and they think self-awareness is only a smaller piece of the puzzle. That part doesn't matter. What's most important is that you take the time to invest in yourself and your development, that you take in these lessons and these ideas that can be practically applied. You run them through your own filter of discernment to decide which things you want to try to take advantage of and use, and then put them into action. And I think if each and every one of us can do that with any book that we read, documentary that we watch, or podcast that we listen to, that's how we continue to evolve and continue to grow.
Well, there's no doubt about it. There is a process to becoming successful. And You have to respect the process. I mean, we all see the 76ers right now. We talk about respect the process, and that's been thrown out so much. But when you hear me say respect the process, what does that mean to Alan Stein Jr.?
For me, it means learning how to detach from outcomes. And that has been one of the biggest hurdles I've ever had to overcome. I mean, when you think of our background in the basketball space, basketball, when you really break it down, is a very finite game. There are winners and there are losers, and that is purely based on the scoreboard. When that final horn goes off, the team with the most points is declared the winner, and those with less points is declared the loser. And it's very black and white. So what's really challenging in the game of basketball is oftentimes your success is measured by outcomes. As a coach, you're measured by your wins and losses, and as a player, very similar. But I don't think that's the best way for us to navigate our lives. What I believe is a better approach is to focus on the process, to really love the work and enjoy and embrace the day to day, and then simply detach from the outcome. Now, I've also found that when you can trust, respect, and embrace the process, that you'll tend to get more of the outcomes you desire anyway. So using basketball as an example, instead of worrying about whether you're going to win or lose or worrying about the final score, just focus on this possession. If you're on offense, focus on making a contribution to your team so that you guys take the highest percentage shot possible. That's the only thing you have to worry about. What can I do with my 4 teammates on the court to give us the highest percentage shot possible? Now, if it's a defensive possession, you want to do the opposite. You say, what can I do right now to contribute to my team to make my opponent take the lowest percentage shot possible? How can I make this as hard for them to score as possible? And when you break it down to the process, even to the point of, well, can I set a screen to get Scott open so that he can, be in his strength zone and take a wide open shot? That's a really high percentage shot for us. So part of my process is making sure that I have the correct footwork and body mechanics to set the right screen at the right time to get you open so that you can step in and knock down a shot. And if we can do that consistently, take high percentage shots on offense and force low percentage shots on defense, the scoreboard will take care of itself. The wins and the losses will take care of itself. And it's the same thing with anything that we're talking about. If you're a parent and you're trying to raise happy, well-adjusted, fulfilled children, focus on the day-to-day. Focus on the process of every interaction you have with them, every conversation, every opportunity to share a life lesson. So I think anytime we can take outcomes and goals, which are fine to have, those are merely the North Star, but don't keep our sights set on that. Focus more on the process and the day-to-day. And the question that any of us should ask ourselves at any given point during the day is an acronym WIN, W-I-N, and that stands for what's important now. That's what your focus should be on at any point during the day, is what's the most important thing that deserves my attention right now. And when you can do that, then you'll be much more process oriented and less goal and outcome oriented. And I think that's a not only a recipe for higher performance and more success and significance, but I found through personal experience, it's also a requirement of happiness, fulfillment, and a sense of inner peace.
Oh, see, I like that. Again, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the Coach Scott Field Show. We've got Alan Stein on with us, the author of Raise Your Game. And I'm going to tell you something. He is dropping a lot of nuggets on us today. And your last kind of statement leads me to segue into this, talking about the process and being in the here and now, being where your feet are. And I know you speak on that. So talk about being on where your feet are, because let's take it a little deeper than where you were just at with
Yeah, I first heard that years ago from Nick Saban, the illustrious coach of the
it.
Alabama football program, who is someone that I've been told, preaches that every single day to everybody in the Alabama football program, is to be where your feet are, which is another way of saying be in the present moment. As I would coach basketball players, I would coach them on a term called play present. Be in the present moment. Don't worry about the turnover or the missed shot or the referee's missed call that happened a few minutes ago. Be in the moment now. Don't worry about the future or the, whether or not you're up or down 6 points or whether or not you're going to win or lose. Be in the moment. I've also heard it said that in order to win the moment, you have to be in the moment. And the more present you can be in the moment that we're experiencing at any given time, then the higher your performance will be. And as I said, there's a direct correlation between high performance and our sense of happiness, fulfillment, and inner peace. So part of that ability to be in the present moment is always being able to quickly refocus your lens on the next play. So don't worry about the play that just happened. Focus on the next play, focusing on, as you already said so perfectly, the process. What do I need to do now that gets me a little bit closer and inches me closer to the goal? And then a big part of being in the present moment is learning how to focus on the only two things we have 100% control over, which is our own effort and our own attitude. At any given moment, I want to make sure that I'm giving the best effort that I'm capable of in whatever I'm doing. That could be an effort of being present and being attentive with my children during dinner, or it could be literally giving the best physical effort I'm capable of in the middle of a workout. But I want to give the best effort that I can. And then I also want to make sure that I have the best attitude and best perspective and mindset in any given moment. And part of that is accepting and acknowledging that we don't have any control over what's going on in the outer world and circumstances around us, but we absolutely have control over what goes on in our inner world. And to me, that's what's most important. So I recognize that I can't control all of the craziness that goes on in the world, but I can control my response to that craziness. And part of being in the present moment is having the peace of mind to choose a response that will allow me to move forward and improve my situation instead of making things worse. And when you can focus on the next play, focus on the process, and focus on the controllables, then you're really doing everything you can to be in the present moment.
See, I like that, Alan, because again, you and I share the same space for our passion for basketball as being coaches and had success when that. And when you are saying that, automatically, I mean, the NBA playoffs are going on right now, and talking about that process and valuing the possession and only controlling the tangibles that you can control, right away, MVP candidates come to my mind. Jokic. He never gets rattled. He just stays focused. He works on that possession, what he's going to do to help his team, whether it's the outlet pass or maybe he's setting the screen with the right angle, just so, he can make his teammate better. So I love hearing that. But then I also think, too, of Damian Lillard, who just dropped 55 points the other night, a guy who you've been able to work with, train with, and actually, talked about you in the book, Kevin Durant. I mean, these guys who can focus on that moment and allow their habits and their choices from those habits to have that muscle memory, those are the guys who can prosper. And so when I hear you say that, I just wanted to elaborate on that because we see it with our own eyes and like, well, how do they do that? Well, this book could kind of help them visualize that process and that step to step so they too can be in that moment.
Oh, for sure. I'm so glad that you drew that comparison because the world's highest performers in any area of life do this better and more consistently than most other people. That's one of many reasons why they're the best at what they do. And a few things that I want to make sure your listeners understand and process. One, these concepts that I've shared so far, and any more concepts that I'll share while we have some time together, are very basic in premise, but none of these things are easy to do. I know that I deliver most of this content in a very matter-of-fact tone, but there is nothing easy about living in the present moment because we're bombarded by distractions all of the time. It is really, really challenging not to get distracted by things that happened a few minutes ago, a few weeks ago, or a few months ago. It's equally hard not to get anxious or worried about the future, what may end up happening. So there's nothing easy about being in the present moment. And even the best of the best, will occasionally have slip ups. As human beings, we're all fallible. We're all imperfect. We're going to make mistakes. But the key is having the awareness to recognize when we make mistakes, being able to course correct, and do these things as consistently as possible. And then when we do step out of bounds or we make a mistake or we make a turnover, is having the grace and the compassion to not beat ourselves up and self-loathe, but quickly move to that next play. You know, you mentioned Damian Lillard, who is clearly one of not only the most accomplished, but one of the most exciting players to watch. And one of the reasons he's so good is because of his next play mentality. You know, Dame can miss 4 or 5 shots in a row, and he doesn't lose any confidence in shooting that next shot. He always believes the next shot's going to go in. And clearly he's established some pretty long distance range. You know, I mean, the guy shoots from the NBA logo often, but that's one of the things that makes him so good, is that he doesn't care about a previous miss. He doesn't let that affect the next shot. And, you know, one thing that's really important, not only for these NBA superstars, but for any of us to ask ourselves, and it should be a very humbling question. Am I successful, or am I performing at a high level because of my habits or in spite of my habits? You know, some people are so riddled with talent that they can perform at a high level, even though they don't do a lot of these little things. But most of us ordinary, normal human beings, we don't have that luxury. You know, LeBron James is so physically and mentally talented in the game of basketball that he can take a few plays off per game and he's still the king on the court. But that doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. And it also means that if he takes a couple of plays off, that he's not as good as he's capable of becoming. And the reason I bring this up is because lots of times I'll be speaking with folks and I'll make the comment about, you know, the best players, and Jokic is a perfect example. If the referee misses a call or doesn't make the call, they're the best players are completely stoic. It doesn't bother them whatsoever. They say, okay, they missed it, next play. They look at the referee's missed call no different than when they miss a shot. It's simply human error. But then, of course, you've got some players and some coaches who really get into it when the referee misses a call, and they complain and they whine a little bit, or they have bad body language. And sometimes those are still the best players in the world. And that's usually my response, is they're the best players in the world in spite of this nagging habit that they have to, you know, argue with the officials during a game. Because certainly if they would stop doing that, it wouldn't hinder their performance. It would actually improve their performance. And this will lead me to this last point. None of us should be stifled or worried about perfection. Basketball is not a perfection game, and life is not a perfection pursuit. Instead of being, you know, concerned with perfection, we should be much more inspired and motivated by progress. You know, am I doing these things more consistently today than I was doing them yesterday or doing them last year? Because where you are in this moment is not near as important as the direction at which you're headed. And as long as your trajectory is pointing up or pointing towards your North Star, then you're in the right place.
Yeah, see, I like that. And when I hear you speaking, one word keeps jumping into my head, because great performers, great leaders, there's that accountability, to be able to hold yourself accountable and hold others accountable, and having an uncomfortable conversation to be able to do that. Because to me, if you can hold yourself accountable, that's the truth serum. So talk about accountability a little bit.
Well, you know, I mentioned the difference between the outer world and the inner world. And accountability starts with the acceptance and acknowledgement that we do not control, as I mentioned earlier, what's going on in the world. So we don't control these things. But personal accountability, and as the Navy SEAL Jocko Willink says, having extreme ownership is all about saying, yeah, I don't control what just happened. You know, I don't control what's going on politically. I don't control what's going on, you know, with the weather. I don't control what's going on with the economy, but I do control my response to those things. And if I'm going to have a very high level of personal accountability and extreme ownership, no matter what happens, I'm simply going to say, you know, okay, how did I contribute to the situation? What can I learn from this situation? What's a mindset or a perspective or a behavior or action that I can have that can actually move me forward and make things better despite what's going on? And, you know, what a tremendous proving ground we've had over these last 14 to 15 months during this global pandemic, where clearly the circumstances in the world have been less than ideal for the vast majority of people walking the earth. You know, at best, you've felt the annoyance of some minor disruption to your normal life. At worst, you've lost a loved one, you've been sick, you've been furloughed, your business has gone bankrupt. I mean, there's a pretty wide spectrum of things that have been caused by this pandemic. And I don't say this to trivialize any of that.
Right.
You know, I consider myself incredibly fortunate that I'm on the lower end of that spectrum. You know, I've been able to remain healthy. My kids and my family and loved ones have been able to remain healthy. My business has been fine. I'm incredibly grateful. And I have so much empathy and compassion for people that haven't fared as well. But even those folks that have experienced some massive trauma and adversity and challenge, they still have the opportunity to choose a response to those things that will move them forward. And as I said earlier, I'm not for 1 second pretending that that choice is easy. You know, that if you lost a loved one or you lost your job or something like that happened, I'm not saying that the easiest gut, response to that is to smile and whistle and act like everything's fine. But you still have to have the accountability and ownership to know that you choose how to respond to this. And with that being said, part of the response, I believe, is having the emotional fitness to accept and to work through what most people coin as negative emotions. I'm not a fan of suppressing, resisting, or ignoring negative emotions. You know, there's nothing wrong with feeling angry, with feeling upset, with feeling depressed, with feeling frustrated. Those are emotions for a reason. Where we run into a problem is if we let those emotions dictate our behavior. We let those emotions start driving the car on how we treat others or how we choose to show up in the world. And that's where we have an issue. You know, it's been said that our emotions are designed to inform us. They're not designed to direct us. So there's nothing wrong with feeling those things. And I encourage you to feel them and sit with them and process them, but don't let them dictate how you show up in the world. And it's the same thing. When catastrophic events happen, it's okay to be sad. You know, it's okay to be upset or hurt or disappointed, but don't let those feelings dictate how you show up, how you feel about yourself, and how you treat others.
Yeah, see, and you talked about the response mechanism, how you respond to it, and how you choose to respond to it to have the mindset to, change the course of the ship that you're sailing. So love hearing that, Alan. Over my shoulder, I've got Kobe Bryant's book, The Mamba Mentality. And I know you share an amazing story, and you've probably told it 1,000 times. But for our viewers here today, he talks about not being bored with the mundane or the basic. Share that story with our viewers because it's so powerful and it's impactful as long as they can take it and hear that story and help choose their path in the right way.
For sure. What I'll do is I'll give you kind of the abbreviated Cliff Notes version of it. And then if anyone wants to hear the full story at length, they can go to alansteinjr.com. And I have a storytelling reel that tells the story with a little bit more flair. But really, I think back to some of the most pivotal moments that I've ever had in my life. And one of those, without question, was back in 2007 when I got to meet Kobe Bryant for the first time. I was hired as the strength and conditioning coach for his Nike Skills Academy. And Nike decided to bring in the top high school and college players from around the country for this intense 3-day mini camp with Kobe. And I had a chance to watch one of his really early morning private workouts. And I remember just being shocked at the simplicity of the drills that he was doing. You know, he spent a tremendous amount of time just working on pivoting and squaring up to the basket and doing basic ball handling and finishing drills. Now, keep in mind, just because these things were basic, it didn't mean they were easy. I mean, he was doing them with razor sharp precision. He was doing them with an unparalleled level of intensity and focus, but the actual drills he was doing were incredibly basic. And that really surprised me. I expected to see, at the time, the best player in the world do some things with a little bit more sexiness and sizzle to them. And when I had a chance to talk to him later that day at camp and basically asked him, why are you doing such basic drills? That's what he said with a smile and a very friendly wink was, the reason I'm the best player in the world is because I don't get bored with the basics. And, that really changed my perspective. That here I am thinking, if someone that has truly mastered his craft and is the best in the world at his field, and he's going to pay homage to and respect the basics, then I need to make sure that I'm doing that as well. And that's something that I try to apply to every aspect of my life. As I tried to evolve into the best keynote speaker that I'm capable of, I always drill down on the basics of what's required to be a good speaker. As I aim to be the best father that I'm capable of to my 3 children, I step back and I dissect what are the basics of being a loving, nurturing, committed father. And I want to make sure that I stick to those. And anytime that I find that my life's getting a little bit blurry, a little bit off course, that I'm not performing at a level that I believe I'm capable of, it's usually because I've started to deviate from the basics. And that's a quick reminder for me to snap back to them. And the coolest part about, sticking to the basics is if you're willing to use the advantage of compounding, interest and consistency, then these aren't things that take hours and hours every day. If you want to become a more proficient writer, think of the basics of what it takes to be a good writer and just work on those for 15 to 20 minutes a day. If you want to have great footwork as a basketball player, just do that for 15 to 20 minutes a day. You don't have to spend 10 hours a day working on the basics. You just need to make sure that that is a pillar and a foundation of your approach. And if you can do a little bit every single day, you'll start to yield massive, massive results.
Great stuff. Because Alan, I too was able to observe Kobe Bryant right here at the Zion Bank practice facility before one of his Utah Jazz games. And I was able to watch just like you and not kind of echoing, but again, his attention to detail. He was going to work on a swing through and shoulder square triple threat position on how he was going to attack the pick and roll. So that way he could get the big to engage and how he was going to dribble through it. So he could set Pau Gasol up for either a pick and pop or a pick and roll, but he was going to make sure that he did it over and over again with high intensity and focus and making sure his feet were square, shoulders were square, how he put the ball in front of him, how he's going to attack, get the big man engaged, and yet how he would get the pass set up for Powell so he could put Powell in a position to be a more proficient scorer. And the fact that he did that over and over again for like 25 minutes with a drenched sweat, with that laser focus to detail, is what made him special.
Absolutely. What I find fascinating is most people will concede and acknowledge that you need to work towards mastery of the basics to become good at anything. But where they fail to accept and acknowledge is you need to continue to work on the basics to sustain that level of excellence and to continue to be good at what you do and slowly make, incremental and micro steps forward. It all's on the basic, on the basics. And and I know everyone has a different connotation to different words in our language, but, I've always loved the word extraordinary. And if you ask a lot of people, they would love to be considered extraordinary in their craft or in the different areas of their life. And as I've unpacked that through conversation, I find that a lot of people believe that what you need to do to be extraordinary is something massive, is something magnificent, is something grandiose. And that's really not what it takes to be extraordinary. Being extraordinary is never getting bored with the basics and having the discipline to master those basics on a daily basis and to work through the mundane and the boring. Because when you can get to a certain level of mastery of the basics, you'll be extraordinary in anything that you'd like to be.
Yeah, when people can make it a game within the game and challenge them to be precise and as close to perfect as possible, that's when they're going to start seeing the byproduct of success in the right direction. And I love that. And Alan, another thing too, we got to be around another superior athlete. When Steph Curry was drafted to the Golden State Warriors, I got to be with him at the NBA Summer League because Keith Smart allowed me to be out with the Golden State Warriors. And I was able to see Steph Curry with, again, a laser-like focus. But tell me some of the things that you were able to observe from a Steph Curry, because, again, he's another one of the best that you were able to observe and apply principles to, your book. Share some of those.
Yeah, well, Steph certainly understands, and this was implanted in him as a very young child. He understands that repetition is not punishment, that repetition is the oldest and most effective form of learning on the planet for skill acquisition. And that hasn't changed, and that's never going to change. Like, he respects, and this goes back to respecting the process, that part of the process is getting in purposeful, task-specific repetitions as frequently as possible. Steph will go down in history as this greatest shooter that the game has ever seen. I mean, we've mentioned Kevin Durant and Damian Lillard. I mean, those guys are lights out shooters. But Steph, I believe, is going to go down as the greatest of all time with the skill of shooting. And it's not by accident, and it's not by luck. It's because he understands the process and he's willing to put in the work during the unseen hours to work towards mastery with repetition after repetition after repetition. I realize Golden State's been eliminated from the playoffs, but if Steph was playing tonight and he goes off for 50 points and knocks down 10 threes, a lot of people are just enamored by that. They're in awe of that. And while it is a spectacular performance, if you saw the level of commitment and the work that he put in when no one else was watching, it becomes less spectacular and more expected. And I don't say that to diminish the performance, but if you saw how much work he put in, you wouldn't be surprised that he makes 10 3-pointers and scores 50 points. You would expect him to do that when you see what he does when no one else is watching. Same thing with Kobe. Kobe's had some extraordinary performances, but when you see his level of attention to detail and intensity during his workouts, you're no longer surprised by it. People that put in that type of work, they expect to have those types of performances. And that's certainly something, that Steph does well. And what Steph does such a remarkable job of is he combines the physical component, perfect footwork and pristine shooting mechanics. And certainly he was born with some amazing neurological hookups. He has great balance and depth perception and hand-eye coordination. But then he also takes that and mirrors that with what we talked about earlier, the ability to be in the present moment. Steph is another one that has that whiteboard memory. He can miss 9 shots in a row and he just erases them off the whiteboard. He thinks the 10th shot is going in and he won't have any hesitation in shooting it. Steph could miss 20 shots in a row. He could be 0 for 20 and the game is tied with 3 seconds left and he will beg for the ball because he knows the next shot is going in. And when you take the type of commitment to repetition that he has and all of the work he's put in during the unseen hours, and you combine that with the mental toughness and fortitude of being in the present moment, moving to the next play, focusing on the process, focusing on the controllables, and you combine all of that, what you end up with is an unparalleled level of confidence and self-belief. There's nobody more confident in the world at shooting a basketball than Steph Curry. And as I said before, that's not an accident, and that's not just blind luck. He's earned the right to be that confident.
See, I love how you say he focused on the controllables because let's be honest, when I was with him at the NBA Summer League with Golden State his rookie year, then the next year they were in a lockout year. I got to coach him again here in Salt Lake City where we had an NBA charity event in Allen. What was neat about Steph, he was already, an hour before the game working on that ball handling work. And again, it was work ethic and repetition. As you said, he was already doing those ball handling drills to get that work ethic, to get that sweat. And the fact that he controlled the controllables, as you mentioned, he blocked out the white noise. He heard people say he was too small. He wasn't a great ball handler. Can he defend, the 2 position? He didn't focus on any of that cynicism that's out there, and he focused on what he could do with repetition, and he did it over and over again. And like you said, he is transforming the game because he controlled what he could control. His attitude, his work ethic, and his focus to detail. And that's what he did. So again, just echoing and sharing another story with the same things that you've observed from some of the greatest.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example with what you just shared about Steph, which I love, is him not letting the outer world affect his inner world. That he has a very tight filter in what he's going to listen to and who he's going to listen to and where he's going to place his attention. And he's not really concerned with the naysayers and people that, prior to him getting drafted said that he wasn't big enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't quick enough, wasn't this, wasn't that. And, at the time, there may have been some validity to that evaluation. Many of the people that were saying those things were professionals at evaluating talent. But Steph did not allow those things to dictate his future. And most importantly, he didn't allow them to dictate his self-belief and his self-confidence. And that's something that's really challenging to do. I'm certainly not impervious to that myself, but I do find it's pretty interesting that, we have these words like self-belief and self-confidence, and yet we allow others to dictate that. Why would I ever give my power away and let anyone else dictate my self-belief or self-confidence? That has to come from within. And those 2 things in particular, they're built on a couple of pillars. One is they're built on our demonstrated performance. The reason Steph is confident at making a game-winning free throw is because he has made thousands and thousands and thousands of free throws in empty gyms when no one else is watching. He has demonstrated to himself that he is capable of making a free throw, and he doesn't allow the external pressure of it being a game 7 or the score being tied or there only being 2 seconds left. He doesn't let that enter his mind frame. He just goes and he shoots a free throw, no different than he probably shot in his backyard when he was growing up. So demonstrated performance is one of the reasons that he's confident. And then the other part comes back to our mindset and the conversations that we have with ourselves. Every single person listening to this or watching this right now, you have a little voice in your head. And if you don't think you have a little voice, it's a little voice that just told you you don't have a little voice. And trust me, you do. And we have to be very careful with how we talk to ourselves. That if you're constantly telling yourselves things like, well, you can't do this, you're not good enough, you're going to miss this shot, that will start to erode confidence. And the best of the best have learned how to talk to themselves in a way that leads to higher performance. It doesn't mean they're phony or lying to themselves. They don't tell themselves things that are untrue, but I know that when Steph is going to the free throw line, he in some way, shape, or form is saying, I am going to make this shot because I've earned the right to make this shot. I deserve the right to make this shot because I've put in the work. And all I got to do is take a deep breath and do the same thing that I've done millions of times since I was a child. And the end result is a made free throw and a game winner.
There you go, Alan. Great stuff, man. You're bringing the passion, you're speaking with purpose, and yet all the things that you are saying are applicable to everyday life. Sports and life have so many parallels, and the things that we can learn from sports, if we apply them to our daily lives, we can be successful as long as we don't allow negative thoughts and negative energy to come in and consume us. And controlling how we consume that stuff is important. Like you said, the books we read, the shows that we watch, who we choose to listen to, those things are all vital to success.
Yeah, and I like the way you just separated that, because we don't really have control over the thoughts that we have. So we can't control that we have negative thoughts, but we can control whether or not we listen to them. We can control whether or not we allow them to steer our behavior in the direction that we go. So controlling thoughts is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is be able to process all of this. Same thing with emotions. You can't really help if you're feeling sad or you're feeling depressed or you're feeling disappointed or you're feeling upset. Many times those are simply visceral responses, but you can control what to do with that information. You can control whether or not you allow yourself to behave in a manner that's congruent with those negative feelings, or if you choose to go in another direction. And that's what's most important. Same thing with missing a shot. I mean, You don't have full control over whether or not the ball goes in the basket. If you did, you would never miss a shot. Every person would shoot 100%. Now, what you can do is you can put yourself in a position to have the highest percentage chance to make the shot, which is having good footwork, being on balance, using good mechanics, making sure that it's a good shot to take based on your range and time and score and whether or not there's a defender. So you can do a lot of things to increase the chance that you'll make the shot. And that's what good shooters do. And then if it happens to miss and rim out, then you also choose whether or not to let that, make that feel a feeling of rejection, or, hang your head or think, oh, I can't believe I missed. I'm not a good shooter. That's your choice. And the great shooters just say, yeah, I missed that one. When's the next shot? Give me the ball again. I'm going to hit the next one.
Yep. See, and again, that same lesson is applicable to whether we're talking about an NBA elite player who may miss a shot, but it's also for like a guy who maybe boss is expecting them to meet a deadline and they don't meet the deadline, how they choose to react by not meeting that deadline. Are they going to let that affect their next job performance? Or are they going to, focus and say, you know what, I'm going to do this one even better than what that one there was going to do. So again, there's life lessons to be said with that.
Absolutely. And with those types of scenarios, anytime you've got two people, in this case, you said kind of a boss and an employee, both of them need to make the commitment to having the attitude to choose the response. So if you and I work together and I work for you and I miss the deadline, well, I need to take personal accountability and responsibility and say, Scott, I missed this deadline. I'm not going to blame anyone for missing it. I'm not going to make any excuses on why I missed it. And I'm not even going to complain that you gave me the deadline. we were in agreement that I would have submitted this proposal by this time and I didn't do it. And first and foremost, I want to apologize. Second of all, if there is anything that I need to explain or clarify, but then most importantly, I need to know what I can do to resolve this and rectify this. I know that you wanted it on your desk at 9 this morning and I missed that. Can I get it to you by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning? Is that an acceptable resolution? And so forth. So that's my half of it. And that's the only half I can control. Now, you need to own your half of it and be able to say what you need to say. But this is what's important. So we need to collectively work together to hopefully get the outcome that we both want. But I have to remember that all I control is what's on my side of the fence and my response. And if your response is to fly off the handle and curse me out and pick up the proposal that I submitted so far and rip it in half and throw it in my face, I don't control that part. Now, I think we can acknowledge that's probably not the best response for you to take, but I don't control that. So now, once again, given this new information, I need to decide, well, how do I respond to Scott, flying off the handle and being really upset and cursing me out? Do I want to add sugar on top of sugar and do the same thing back to you and have a very adversarial, confrontation? Or do I want to just say, you know what, I'm going to give Scott some grace and some compassion. He's really, really upset with me right now because I didn't do what I promised that I would do. And I'm going to give him, and this isn't a pass to let someone treat you poorly, but I don't control what you're doing. And I'm going to take a step back and say, hey, that's Scott's way of choosing to respond to this situation, but I'm still going to take the high road. I'm going to figure out a way to resolve this to the best of my ability. And I know I've said this before, and I have to say it again. Choosing those responses is rarely easy. It's rarely the gut reaction or the natural default. For most people, the natural default is to let their visceral emotions in the moment overtake their behavior.
Amen.
Well, I'm really irritated right now, so now I'm going to blow up and I'm going to act irritated. And that's where we can separate ourselves and evolve to a higher level of consciousness by not allowing that to happen. And one of the best ways to reduce that occurrence is learning how to just take a pause, is just take a breath, is just say, okay, Scott just yelled at me and cursed me out. He's clearly upset. I'm just going to take a moment. I'm going to have some empathy and some compassion in my response, but I want to make sure that I'm very intentional with how I respond to this and that I'm not going to just let my emotions consume me. If we just let our emotions dictate how we show up in this world and behave, then our whole life is just going to be this constant roller coaster of ebbs and flows. And if you're looking for consistency, you simply can't do that. I've got a good friend of mine named Ben Newman who says standards over feelings. And I think he got that from Nick Saban also, which is, my feelings might be low at the moment, but I have a very high standard of excellence in how I behave and how I show up and how I treat others. And I'm not going to let my low feelings in the moment erode how I know that I'm supposed to behave.
Yeah, see, I like that. And if we're going to continue that role play, me as the leader and the boss, I need to also have empathy and compassion to say, hey, maybe as the boss, maybe Alan is so overwhelmed with so many other projects because he's being a good teammate, helping his teammates. How can I lessen that load? How can I, as a boss, empower him to make him feel more comfortable, to be more productive with the thing that I needed from him? And same thing as coaches on the sideline. Why am I going to scream and yell and overreact to a bad call from a referee or, to a misplay or a bad pass when it's like, hey, you know what? He's doing the best he can. He didn't try to make that pass. How can I put him in a better position on the court so that way we minimize those turnovers moving forward? And that's how we evolve as better professionals.
Absolutely. And just to make sure we're crystal clear for anyone listening, I don't want them to take this out of context and think that I have this belief system that everything is Pollyanna and that everything is wonderful and okay and that everybody gets a trophy. No, there are deadlines for a reason. And if you miss a deadline, I'm not condoning, poor behavior or missteps. What I'm saying is once that becomes factual, I have now missed this deadline. How can we work together to come up with the next best resolution? So this is not about saying, being a boss and saying, just turn in stuff whenever you feel like it. And if you don't turn it in, I don't care. I love you anyway. No, it's not that approach. It's saying, as the leader, this specific project or proposal needs to be done at this time with this expectation and at this standard in order for us as a team to be successful. And if you miss that deadline, now we need to course correct. We need to evaluate and figure out why you missed it and rectify that. And we need to figure out, well, what's the next best course of action we can take? Same thing as you just said so perfectly in the game of basketball. Your point guard comes down and throws an errant pass and you turn the ball over. That is now a fact. There is nothing you can do to get that possession back. So if you spend all of your time browbeating them and yelling at them and living in the past, you're not giving them the tools they need to be successful moving forward. So this is still about a high level of accountability. And if in that moment as a coach, you believe you need to pull that player out of the game, sit them down, look them in the eye, and have a discussion about that turnover, you have the right to do that. But it's about saying, we did not accomplish what we were trying to accomplish on that possession. So now that's over. How do we make the best of this situation? And the best analogy I can think of with this type of mindset is when you think about a GPS. You type an address into your phone because you're going to visit somewhere that you don't know how to get to. And you put that address in, and that's your ending destination. And if you're like me, even with GPS, you're still going to miss a turn or miss an exit. And whenever that happens, my GPS just says in a very, very monotone, sterile voice, rerouting. I missed the right turn I was supposed to make. The GPS doesn't yell at me. It doesn't call me an idiot. It doesn't turn the phone off. It just says rerouting, which basically means I missed the turn. So now we need to reroute and we need to find another way to get to our destination. And I believe that's the same level of stoicism we should have, but the same approach we should have. I was supposed to turn this proposal into Scott. I didn't turn it in. So now we both need to reroute. I'm a point guard. I go down. I make an errant pass. I turn the ball over. Was not ideal, was not preferred, but now we need to reroute. And if we can learn how to quickly refocus and reroute when we make mistakes, because let's face it, mistakes are inevitable. I mean, no one enjoys making them and no one prefers that we make them, but they are inevitable. And when you can learn how to just move to the next play and quickly reroute, now you're setting yourself up to be successful in the long run.
Eloquently said and effectively communicated. That's why he is a corporate speaker. That's why he is a corporate performance coach. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Stein. My goodness, this has just been wonderful, and I've truly enjoyed this. I love the energy that you have and the passion that how you share and communicate your points. I think it's people can just absorb that like a sponge and apply that to their mannerisms and their mindsets. It's going to help them be successful. You're very, very assertive with your communication and your social media. Let people know where they can kind of follow you through social media.
Sure. Well, there's two websites folks can visit. They can go to alansteinjr.com if you want more information on my speaking services. You can also go to strongerteam.com, and there are a few different resources there. Certainly my book is one of them. I have a podcast by the same name, but I also have an online course, a 10-module mini course that can help folks put these things into practice. And then I'm at Alan Stein Jr. on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I aim to be really accessible and engaging on those platforms. So anyone, if you are watching or listening to this and you enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, and there's something else that you want me to expand on, or you have a question, or even if you want to challenge anything that I said, by all means, shoot me off a DM on social. I'd be honored to get back to you and continue the conversation.
Alan, this has just been phenomenal. I mean, this show's about serving, empowering, and growing. And I feel like we've done that with this. And you were the ultimate guest to have on. Again, ladies and gentlemen, author of Raise Your Game, Alan Stein. This is the Coach Scott Field Show. I'm a better version of me just for spending this 50 minutes with you. So for that, I say thank you. I admire you. I respect you. I am a fan of Alan Stein, and I hope that you all go out and get that book and follow him and see the content that he provides on social media daily. It's wonderful. He just had a thing on talking about, the struggle is real. Go look that up and go see the content that he shared. This guy shares amazing content. Alan, God bless you. Much success moving forward. Hopefully we'll reconnect again, and we'll have you come back and be a guest on our show again, because to me, this has been wonderful.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Scott.
God bless you, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is the coach, Scott Fields, host of the Coach Scott Fields Show. Be looking for our next episode coming real soon where we continue to bring the best from the sports entertainment industry to provide tools for your toolbox. God bless, be safe, be healthy, and continue to evolve and grow. God bless. Great job, Alan.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was so much fun. And you're right, that flew by.
Oh, I'm telling you, I feel like I got to wait for Christmas again now.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. Well, you do a brilliant job, and I appreciate you guiding the conversation and your energy and curiosity and all of the things that you contributed and added. So this was a lot of fun, and let's definitely stay in touch. And if and when I can ever add value, don't hesitate to reach out.
Same here. Reach out at any time, brother.
Okay, bud. See ya.
God bless.